We're going to go ahead and get started. I know some people will be joining here in just a minute, and I'll let them in as they do. But first, I want to welcome you to Path to Publication. Path to Publication is a professional development workshop that focuses on various topics such as publishing, writing, research and grants, and the graduate student experience. This platform provides distinguished guests to share their insights and expertise and hopes to move us all forward on our own writing agendas and publications. The workshop is supported by the Education Leadership Research Center, directed by Dr. Beverly Irby, the Center for Research and Development in Language and Literacy Acquisition, directed by Dr. Laura Alessio, as well as the Graduate Student Advisory Council. The workshops are held on the second and fourth Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. during the normal semester. The format will include a brief introduction of our speaker, and the speaker will share their expertise for about 40 to 45 minutes. After that, we will open up the floor for questions. If along the way you have questions, please drop them in the chat for discussion at the end. Again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to attend today. Now I will introduce today's speaker. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Ramon Goings. Dr. Goings currently serves as the Associate Professor in Language, Literacy, and Culture Interdisciplinary Doctoral Program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Dr. Goings is also the founder of Done Dissertation, a dissertation consulting firm that helps doctoral students, doctoral programs, and graduate student organizations break down the dissertation process into manageable pieces so that doctoral students can finish their dissertations in 1 year or less. Author of over 60 scholarly publications, Dr. Goings is an expert on gifted and high-achieving Black male student success in the pre-K through 20 settings and diversifying the teacher and school leader workforce. In addition to his scholarship, Dr. Goings has expertise in cultivating the academic writing of doctoral students and early career researchers. I want to introduce Dr. Ramon Goings and thank him for coming and speaking with us today. I'm going to hand it over to him.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for your leadership with this event. I really do appreciate you all and your time. There's a lot of things that you all will be doing. So spending the morning with me to talk about how do we leverage our social media to have more impact with our work. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. What I want to do is, as I'm going to bring up my slides for today's presentation, if you can in the chat, just let me know, who you are and your role. If you're a graduate student, faculty, I just want to get an idea of who my audience is right now. And then I will go ahead and get into the material. It just will help me, and I'll tailor my remarks in this presentation to kind of fit what I see as the audience here today. And we will use the chat extensively. I'm not one of those presenters that is just going to talk to you. We're going to have an exchange. So I hope that you all already got your fingers ready to type, and we'll engage in some conversation throughout this morning. Okay, first things first, we have to do this per, usual for Zoom. Do you all see this full screen on your side? I just want to make sure we're good there. Perfect. And I've got like 3 screens. So y'all see my head going in a certain direction. I got you all up on the one of my screens so I can see you. Then I got my chat going on too, so I can kind of see what the conversation is. And so we will get into an exchange from there. All right. Oh, Dr. Drury, how you doing? It's good to see you. I like it when I see my friends on the call too.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good, good. Dr. Amir, good to see you, brother, as well. We got third-year doctors.
Hello, hello.
Hey, hey. Let's see, third-year doc, student assistant professor, perfect. So today's presentation, I want to talk about how to leverage social media to increase the impact of your research and visibility as a scholar. The reason why, and I'll talk a bit about my journey to do this, is that I go around, I do a lot of different presentations and workshops with doctoral students and some faculty. And one of the big pieces that sometimes is missing from our doctoral training is like, how do we get impact and how do we get visibility on our work outside of the traditional academic route in terms of, attention to publications and those things? Like, we know that part very well, but how do we leverage social media? And I think it's something that we have to consider and make it a part of our skill set and kind of put in our toolkit if we're trying to, have our work reach a broader audience. And so my goal for today is to just take the mystery out of using social media to increase your visibility. So again, I want to make this applicable and very practical. For those of you who don't know me, my background is actually as an educator. I started out my career as a music teacher. So my goal in life coming out of high school and college was to become Quincy Jones. And so if you know who Quincy Jones is, he's a music producer who created Michael Jackson's Thriller. And for me, I was always fascinated by music and the sound of it. And so when I found out that Quincy Jones made the music, I was like, I got to be him. So I go to school and, as a good parent, my mom was like, well, that's great. This music career thing might work out, but why don't you have a backup plan? And so I said, all right, I'll major in music education just in case. And I fell in love with music and teaching kids. And so that shifted my whole career to really working with students and really supporting kids to get through school. I really loved it. I've taught all grade levels. In one particular area, what ended up happening, and this again will connect back to how I use social media, is that when I was a teacher in my first year, I saw a lot of the Black boys in my class, my music class, who were brilliant. They can make connections between music, art, music, science, all these things. And then when they would leave my class, in this particular room, my first year teaching, there was this long hallway. And at the end of the hallway, you either go to the left or to the right. And most of the class went to the right, but all the Black boys in most of my classes went to the left. And as you know, anything from my education folks who are on, a lot of this, what this meant is that a lot of the Black boys are going to special education. And I had to figure out, well, why is that and what can I do about it? And so that's why I went back and got a certification in special education to become a special ed teacher to kind of understand what's going on, what can I do? And so that really informs a lot of my work. So the way I teach, whatever I do is through that lens of helping to support my students, particularly students who are in my special education classes. And with that, I became very much interested in doing research about Black boys and men. And that's why I initially started out my work. I focused on high achieving Black students because all the literature had just positioned Black boys as a deficit, like they weren't good, they never could be successful. And I knew that just wasn't the case. So I spent my career really doing a lot of that. And now, being able to train doctoral students to carry out those type of work where we're challenging norms in our field and disciplines. At its core, I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. While my work centers in education, I'm very much interested in how education crosses borders because I think education is like a centerpiece for everything else in life. And so I'm very much interested in that. And through this work, from being a struggling doctoral student, I found it done dissertation. So I first started out as someone who didn't understand how to write. It was very much a challenge for me. And then from there, I started to develop a system. I started to figure out, well, how am I going to improve? And so what I would do is I would read all the work of all the researchers whose people admired. And I wanted to understand, how do they write? How do they think? And so with that, I started to develop my own kind of craft and my system. And now what I do is I teach my system to other folks to get through the doctoral process as well as write for publication. I love working with students and I love working with faculty to support students at its core because I'm still a teacher there. But I love to help cultivate people to change from student to scholar, but in particular to use social media as one of the ways to leverage and create a broader audience for your work. I think a lot of us, given, who are in education in particular, like our work should be applicable to those outside of the academy. And so I think social media is one of the great ways to do this. I do want to lay out, I am someone who does do research. So a lot of these conversations I hear from folks, they're like, well, can I do social media and do my scholarship? And sometimes we have this perspective that's either or. And I want to say it's both and. So I think that we should continue as faculty. I know we have a number of faculty on here or folks who are looking to transition to faculty. Definitely keep your scholarship at its core. So I've, tons of productivity. I have 6 books, the peer-reviewed journal articles, the book chapters. I've written over about, at this point, 40 op-eds using social media as a platform. My work has been pretty cited for someone who's fairly early in their career. And so I always put this caveat there, definitely do this work, but I want you all to think about using social media as a tool just to extend the work that you're already doing. So I want you to think that this as a tool versus it being something I have to do completely different than what I'm currently doing in my research. But what I want to do again, as I mentioned, I want to get us involved in the chat. What I would love for you to do is, I'm just going to pose this question to you. If you wanted to search online and you wanted to find a recipe about how to make apple pie, where would you search? And in your response, tell me where, whatever website, wherever you're going to go. And then tell me, if you can, if you're willing to, how you identify. Are you a Gen Z person? Do you identify as a millennial, Generation X? And I'm sorry, I need to change that so the age range is 39 to 54 for Generation X, or you consider a baby boomer. And this is taken from the Pew studies, how they define these categories. So I didn't make this up. These are the years and ages that they say that you should have. So I'm curious to see, if you had to search for and you want a recipe for apple pie, where are you going? Okay, Donna is going to Google. Pinterest. Okay. Google. Okay. This is very interesting. I hope you all seeing like the difference in where folks are searching, right? YouTube. Okay. So for my folks on YouTube, there's 2 of you all so far. YouTube, why YouTube? I'm just curious. If you unmute yourself, that's fine. You can definitely have this conversation. Why YouTube?
So good morning, everyone.
Yeah, for me, I YouTube it because like I'm a visual person, so I want to see it, and I want to see the recipe and how they do it in front of me.
Okay.
Yes, same here for YouTube. I learned it from my daughter in 3rd grade. So whenever she wants to find something for her mom to cook, like cupcake or whatever, she Googled it for YouTube. And she said, "See, it's very easy. We can do that." So she told me how to do that.
I love it. Let me see who else. I'm looking at responses. Andrea, why the recipe book? I'm curious.
Because I mean, if I have a recipe book, I need to use it or chunk it. So I have several.
Love it. Perfect. And Dr. Let's see, who's this? Amir, how about you? Google. Why Google versus some other platform?
I figured it's going to give me a lot of options. And then from there, I'll decide which are the best. Like, it might give me a YouTube video, but it also might give me like all recipes, or and then I'll be able to compare them, and I'll decide which one I think I like. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. It's interesting. I hope you all just seeing the responses, right? So, but here's the context of what's happening right now. If you all are thinking about this, TikTok is actually the most popular search engine since 2021. So you have to think about this now as researchers, right? Imagine this is a newer platform, but it's becoming the most popular search engine. And there is actually an interview with the vice president of Google, where he actually acknowledges this. Like he says, like, for a lot of folks who are looking up anything, they go to TikTok first and then Google second. And so they are recognizing Google, who has been longstanding the most popular website to visit. But they're knowing for searches, TikTok has definitely started to increase over Google. But the question and thing we have to start considering as scholars is, what does this mean for us? And this is the argument I typically will make, and something we have to consider with this, right? There is a high chance that people who can use your work and implement it won't find your work in its original journal, article, or book format. Because we got to think about it for a number of reasons. As researchers, if we're writing in peer-reviewed publications, a lot of those journals sit behind a paywall. So we've already excluded folks who could use our work just by that alone. Or if folks don't realize that, hey, I can reach out to the author and they'll send me the paper. Not everyone knows that that is a common practice. So folks who can use your work may not even go that route. So social media might be a place that they go to search and try to figure things out. But just imagine that folks who want your work won't find it in its original format. And the question that we have to consider as researchers is, do we continue to do things how we've done them? Or do we adapt and figure out ways to then shift our work, still do the work we need for the academy, but then also make our work more accessible for folks out in the broader community? And I love Jordan's comment talking about going to TikTok for how-tos, but it can be going and looking up things with multiple steps because video lengths are short. Yeah, and so every platform has their pros and cons. We're going to talk about how to think through that when you're trying to leverage social media to build your visibility. And so with that, this is what I typically see. This is typically right now how I see work. A lot of people in the thought process, right, of how research should be spread. We do the research, we do the work, we publish it in whatever format, typically journal articles, book chapters, books, etc. Oftentimes our mindset is like, oh, great, we have this scholarship, and as we're developing it or as it's coming out, we're going to present it at conferences. And then the perspective is that from conferences that has impact in the field because it will spread that way. People will, it will spread amongst faculty, will spread it to students, and students will spread it to schools or wherever else you are doing the work. That's typically how it's spread. What I'm asking and what I want people to consider is just a more relevant approach, I think, to doing this work. Still publish. Again, I still say do the work that you need to do. Still do your conference presentations. But here with conference presentation, I'm very particular because now I want to do both where the academics will be, but then I also want to do where is my audience that needs to work? Where do they go to get their professional development and where do they go to conferences? Because I want to present my work in both areas to have more ways to spread my work. So for some of us, I know it's centered on education. I would say like, we know folks may go to UCEA or, or AERA, right? But then also why not go to ASCD or, more of our practitioner oriented conferences where folks will be that can use our work. Then the piece I'd love to add is that I want us to start thinking about how do we share and explain our work via social media? Because again, it allows us to reach a broader audience, but then we have to start thinking about how do we actually do it? Because a lot of us feel like I don't have the skill set to do it, or I don't know where to start. So there's some things I want to talk about today. And then from there, I find that we have impact in the field, because if you've seen anything, when social media spreads things, like ideas can spread really quickly and much faster than what we see in journal articles in our traditional ways of publishing. So this is something I always why I do it. And just to be quite honest, I was someone who actually was against doing anything via social media. It wasn't until 2013, and I was working for the White House, and my director was a social media fanatic. He found that the best way to spread information was via social media. And he just told me, he was like, Ramon, get on this thing. And this is back when like Twitter was really kind of the central hub. He was like, hurry up and get online and start doing this social media thing, or else you're going to miss the wave. And I thought, I didn't understand him at first, but he was definitely a visionary in that way, that seeing that social media was going to be a way to spread information. But with that, I know a lot of folks is thinking about, why should you consider doing it? One, as you can imagine, it gives your research more reach and impact, even within the field, right? Because not everyone reads each other's papers. So sometimes just having connections via social media and sharing your work out that way gives folks in your field a more way to kind of understand the work that you do. When we're thinking about tenure and promotion, like these are some things that, the more folks that know your work, the more, they have something to speak upon. They might have seen your work online and read it. So you got to kind of be strategic, right? I think this gives you more reach and impact in that way as well. I think what it does really well in terms of leveraging social media is it positions you as an authority. This is really important, particularly for all the work that you all are doing when you're trying to reach a broader audience, right? Because you all might be an authority in the academy, but if folks outside the academy don't know your work, you have to spend some time to really position yourself in that way to kind of galvanize the people who can use your work. I will be quite frank that you can definitely leverage social media to generate income. I'm all for folks leveraging their academic skill sets to make a living. Like I'm definitely a proponent of that, and social media does allow you to do that. So if you're someone who does consulting in a particular area that might be based on your research, using social media gives you the opportunity to position yourself as an authority, and then from that, people will start reaching out and saying, "Hey, I like what you're doing. Come in and be a speaker, or come in and do this consulting, or come in and do these various things." I've gotten so many opportunities via social media to do this type of work, just because I put myself and my work out there. And then again, lastly, it's a networking opportunity. And there's so many opportunities via social media. For instance, like I mentioned about tenure and promotion, meeting folks that you wouldn't necessarily have access to. Some of my favorite scholars that, I don't get to see at conferences or those types of things, I can reach out to them via social media and build an online relationship that at some point I can build offline as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity also for my doc students that are here. There's an opportunity using social media to build a community, because I know going through the doctoral journey, especially the dissertation process, can feel lonely. So there's the community aspect there. And then also for my faculty and postdocs, there's an opportunity to build that network of collaborators, because when they find out that you're doing a particular type of work, if they didn't know you prior, they now know you, and there's an opportunity to build. And with that, I'll give an example. There was when I first finished my doctorate, and I was writing about Black male adult learners in higher education. And at the time, I was the only person really writing about that particular topic. And there was a professor, she was at a university in Florida. I never met her in my life, but we connected on social media because she was talking about Latino male adult learners. And that was her particular research area. And what we ended up doing is that from social media, we put together a conference proposal and we had a conference together. And the first time I ever met her was at this conference 15 minutes before we presented. And so that is the power, I think, of leveraging social media to build a network. And she's still a great colleague of mine to this day from that exchange. And so there's so many opportunities that I think we don't often take advantage of. But I know a lot of you all are probably thinking, right, what do I do and where will people find me? That is the number one thing that a lot of folks are thinking about. There are a number of platforms. I didn't put them all here. There's so many. But I will say, regardless of where you're going to spend your time online, there's 3 ways to communicate your work. You're either going to do it in written format, so short or long form. You can do it in video format, short or long form, and then audio, short and long form. Each of the platforms has their particular platform that they like. So for instance, I know some of us said YouTube was our search for apple pie. People like YouTube because it's a longer form video and I get to see what's happening. So sometimes the visual really helps a lot of folks. Whereas now what we're seeing because of TikTok and other platforms, the trends are going to more, shorter form content in terms of your research or whatever it is you're trying to communicate to another audience. So it's just kind of figuring out what works best for you. And I always say, be authentic to who you are in this. I get a lot of folks who feel apprehensive because they feel nervous or they're scared to put themselves out there. They don't like how they look on camera. They don't like how they sound. So if that's the case, written might be the best content strategy for you to share your work. For those of us who are like more outgoing and willing to do this, video might be your way. Or some of y'all just like to talk and audio might be a way. And like a clubhouse would be a great place to galvanize people in your particular research area. And again, as you have questions, please drop them in the chat because I'll try to address some as I'm talking as well. Is there anything in particular that's coming up for you related to platform and what you're thinking about? And I will say with all of these platforms, the job that's going to be for you as the researcher to figure out is where does your ideal audience hang out online? Depending on what you all write about and what you think about, there might be a different space that people are online that are more centered. So for instance, a lot of academics, I would say now, a lot of academics are on Twitter. So if that was your audience, say you were doing things around faculty development, I probably would have, Twitter as a main piece of where I disseminate my work, possibly Instagram and TikTok, where a lot of professors kind of are congregated. Depending, again, what you're doing, you figure it out. For me, initially, all my stuff was on Twitter and Facebook. But I started to figure out that when I shared work on LinkedIn, because of the way LinkedIn's platform works, that I got a lot of visibility of my work on LinkedIn. So there's a lot, for me, I shifted. I went to LinkedIn because I found that that's where my audience was. So a lot of this is exploring about where people are and you determining who do you want to talk to and who do you actually want to share your work with. Because it's one thing to share our work with the academy. We do that in our journals. But if we want to get this out broader, you got to start thinking about where are those people, if you're doing work on teachers, where do those teachers congregate? It might be a hashtag on Instagram, like Teachers on Instagram. That might be the place I go and I start posting and building community with people. So a part of this work on your end is like to figure out where does your audience hang out? And then you just start to show up and provide value to the audience based on your work. I always say center this on the work that you do to position yourself as an authority in your particular area. And with that, I'm very much a practical person in this. So I want to give you an example of how I've done this, just so we can make it from, theoretical, like here's how it could go, but here's how you can do it. So I want to give an example. So for my scholarship, right, I had 2 books. So I have one book called 14 Secrets to a Done Dissertation. This is more of a practitioner book for students, right? I wrote this book for students. And then I have a edited book called Dissertating During a Pandemic. It came out maybe, I think it was in January or February of this year. It was co-edited with 3 of my former doctoral students. One's a postdoc now at LSU, and the one's a professor at a community college. Another one's a school principal. And so we did this while they were finishing up their dissertations. So this was a scholarship, right? And this was the piece, that we were doing. And we also written other work based in this area. So I always say I lead with the scholarship, but then I got to figure out how do I translate this to places where where other doctoral students and faculty, what do they read and where are they? So what I ended up doing is I used YouTube, our YouTube channel. And so I did a whole series about how do you navigate the dissertation during a pandemic, giving strategies for doc students. Because I know there's a lot of students who are going on YouTube as a search engine, trying to figure out how do I get my dissertation done? And then now I can plug in the scholarship that I've done, in addition to giving them more insight about the work in a way that's accessible, right? I'm not heavily citing folks when I'm doing these kind of talks and presentations online, but again, it's a way I can still send people to the scholarship so they can get that as well. Then from there, what I've done is I have a series that I write with Interfolio. It's called the Smart Scholar series that I write with them. And so what I ended up doing is myself and Dr. Tomlin, who was an editor of the book, we wrote a short piece. It was about 800 words, but it was called Dissertating During COVID, 3 Tips for Doctoral Students and Faculty. We were taking insights from our book and then providing it in a platform that's easy to digest. And in particular, Interfolio, this particular series I have with them, has a large readership. And so leveraging people seeing those articles in a way that they can read in 3 to 5 minutes. So it doesn't take them a long time to get through the material. Then from there, on my Instagram page, I'll also break these pieces down, like that video on how to dissertate during a pandemic. I'll put it on Instagram as well as places. I know some people are searching for information in different areas. And so I want to have my research and work in different places that can reach a lot of different folks. And then from there, I use Twitter to then promote the book. And so again, you can use all these in tandem with each other to build an audience and to build a following. And this is one of the ways I've done just with these 2 pieces. I do this all the time with anything I write. If I write a peer-reviewed journal article, typically I will write some form of an op-ed based on that article. Because again, I want my work to reach a different type of audience outside of the academy. So again, I hope this is helpful to kind of see, how do you take something that you've written in one space and then develop it and think through it in another. I will say what it will require you to do is make your work, you have to simplify in some ways the concepts, right? You don't want to make this so complex, particularly if you're talking about very complex topics that your audience can't understand. So this is definitely a mental exercise at first until you figure out and get a groove on how do I communicate my work to this very different audience. And during the Q&A, if you have questions particularly about your work, I can give an example related to maybe something that you do specifically. So we definitely can have that conversation as well. And real quick in the chat, I would love to know, what apprehensions do you all have about using social media? I'm curious, because I know we have some, and I'm going to talk about what I typically see when I do these types of workshops, but I would love to hear from you all about what's your apprehensions. And thank you for the comment, Hamada, about, using past my own struggles and things I've done with students to develop new material. That's so important.
Yeah, that's very meaningful assistance.
Somebody said the pace of social media posts, how often should I post? It seems like possibly visibility requires a lot of consistency. Okay, that's great. There's some pretty harsh critics out there. Yes, yes, Karen, indeed there are. No, that's great. I love it. Well, as you all are typing, I'll continue to bring this up. And but what I typically see, right, and some of you all are touching on these, the most common apprehensions I hear from folks. And Aaron's getting at cancel culture. Yes, indeed. First things first, this kind of gets at, I think, Amir's point. There's just so many options, I don't know where to start. And there are. And what I would say with this, as you all are thinking about your strategy, and particularly get at Amir's thought, is that when you think about how often to post and what it is, I just want you to be consistent. So if it is your goal is to, hey, I'm going to do this thing 1 time a week on Mondays, I'm going to post every day at 12. Let's say high noon is where I'm going to post every Monday. Just make that your goal. And people will start following the cadence of what you do. Think about how TV shows come on. Your show might come on once per week. You got to think about it in that way. You develop the cadence for yourself. And then as you get more comfortable, you might say, hey, I want to go from 1 time a week to 2 times a week. But when you think about how often, what I want you all to do is just get into a routine. And what I do is that I schedule my posts out for the month. So let's say my cadence was once a month. I would spend maybe 2 hours on one Sunday and plan out the next 4 Monday posts. That way I do it 1 time. And a lot of these social media platforms will allow you to schedule. So now you can schedule it in advance. You do the 2 hours or 1 hour worth of work, you dust yourself off and you're going back to your scholarship and doing everything else that you have to do. So these things can be done and can be automated where you just sit down and do it 1 time and then schedule things out. Another apprehension I see folks often thinking about, like, how this helped me towards tenure and promotion for my faculty. A lot of times folks think about this as something to do like post tenure or all those things. I think this should be part of your dissemination plan. Like this should be like, how do I take the work that I'm doing and get it out? We talk about impacting the academy, like, and oftentimes we think about it in such a very closed-minded way. So this is another way to reach audience. Like imagine if, you know, the process or a model that you developed, because you've been talking about it so much and teachers know about it on social media, it's been used in 10,000 schools. You know, those are the things that can happen when people are able to see your work. But again, you got to get it in front of them. And I think social media is a great way to do it. So I always say, include this as part of your tenure promotion process and just, you know, as something to think about and not something that should be put off to the side. And the next part in terms of apprehension speaks to Karen's comments about, you know, how are you dealing with the harsh critics? And for me, like, how do you deal with, hostile comments? I would say this is part of this. I would say this is probably the downside to it, right? There are people that will make comments and will say things. What I want you all to think about is that what people say about your work or about what you said is not a reflection of you as a person necessarily, right? Depending on what you're talking about. But if we keep it about your work and you center your comments about your work, it's not about you. And so with that, I want you all to not take on people's reactions to you. But I will say, if you feel like you're a person where people's comments really matter and that being on social media is really like detrimental to your mental health, I always say it's never worth it, right? And what I would say, if that's the case, then you make your posts, you schedule them, and don't look at the comments. That would be what I would do to protect my sanity if that was the case. I have dealt with this in terms of hostile comments. I had a tweet go viral, maybe it was at 2021, and I was just saying that, you know, academics should leverage their skill set and use social media and have a side hustle. I said that they should use their skill set to generate money outside of their typical positions. And people, I got so much backlash for that. And that's just part of what happens. And people said all sorts of things. And then I had to come to a realization, like, none of these people really know me. And then the people who do know me know who I am, can speak to my integrity and all of these things. So sometimes you just have to deal with it and let it go. And it doesn't last forever. But depending on what you say, it does bubble up. And so you see sometimes where controversial comments will bubble up. And so you have to be mindful of it for sure. But I always say, if it's about your work and you're centering on things that you've written about and done, I feel good about that if I'm centering on my work. I think that keeps people a lot of times safe, is when people start sharing their outside perspectives on things that they're not they don't have expertise in, is when you get into some trouble sometimes. And then I often hear a lot about people don't know who I am, so I need to have a following first before I start on social media. And the thing is just get started, right? And just be consistent, and people will find you. Your audience will gravitate towards you the more you are visible to them. And lastly, folks always say, this is just another thing on my long list of things to do, and I don't have the time. Like, look, I got to teach my classes. I have to write for my publications. I need a tenure promotion. I need a promotion to full. I don't have time for this. And I would just say, put this as a component of your outreach plan for your work. So it's integrated into what you do. The more you integrate, the easier it will become, and you won't think about it as an additional thing to do. But what I often see, and when folks are sharing their work, this is what I typically see. And when people think about, hey, I'm going to share my work online, and this is how it looks. It's going to be this one tweet and say, I'm very now, excited to announce whatever the service is. I just found this on Twitter as an example, right, to post. Oftentimes, this is where, as academics, we leave it at that. When we have a book come out, we leave it at the one post. We might post on all our platforms so all our friends can know, and then that's it. What I want you all to start thinking about, where's a different mind shift and approach. You need time to build your audience and for people to know your work. And if whatever you're promoting, they need time to really recognize it. And I want you to think about that. There's a stage of awareness that people go through in order to, buy the book or to bring you in to speak or whatever it is. First, it's going to start with people are unaware of who you are. They don't know your work. They know you from nothing. They have no clue that you exist. Then once you start being consistent and you continuously talk about the work that you do, folks will become aware. It's like, oh, okay, I know that, I know that Karen, because I know her work, she's talking about cultural responsiveness in terms of classroom management. So I know, okay, she's going to keep talking about that. Okay, I see that. And then what happens, folks become interested in what you do. And then from there, like when they become interested, they're like, all right, I'm going to inquire and actually learn about this person's work more intimately and maybe How do I bring them into my school? Or how do I get them connected with us and our organization in some way? And then lastly, you become a collaborator with them, or in some cases, they become a client if you have a service or a consulting package or offer for someone. But I want to say that this journey does take months to a year for you to be seen as an authority online, because again, you're kind of there's other people in the space, and you kind of have to sift through all of that and get to the top where people understand and know who you are. But again, remember that folks online are not reading your work, so they don't know about your expertise. This is why it's so important. I want you all to keep sharing your expertise in your work, because you all are doing so many great things, and we want more people to know about it. Because I'm a firm believer, as researchers, we have the ability through our work to change the world. And if the world doesn't know, we can't change it, right? And so I really want us to think about this in a meaningful way. And I will say, I do this myself. Like, I had my book, 14 Secrets to a Done Dissertation, came out February of 2021. I still promote that book a year and a half later. Everywhere I go, I promote the book. You have to do that. And particularly if you all are trying to make and sell things, like, you have to continuously promote, because people forget. And so the more often they see it, the more often that you're interacting with them, and the more often that you are in their realm of awareness, the more likely they are for you to become a collaborator. And just to give an example of how this all works, I remember one time I was posting about my work on Black male adult learners in higher education. I was doing a number of posts about it, writing about it. And then next thing you know, out of nowhere, the Lumina Foundation sends me a tweet and DMs me on Twitter. I was like, hey, we have this initiative. We would love to learn more about your work so that you can help us form this work that we're doing on adult learners. So you see, there's so many connections. I didn't have that connection. I didn't have a person I knew. It was just through someone seeing the work continuously that they decided to reach out. And these things happen all the time. And a lot of foundations are going online to figure out who are the experts in areas to bring people in. They do it all the time. And so this is definitely a way to get your work out there. I do want to give you some tips as we get ready to wrap up in the next about 5 minutes or so. I want to give you some tips on how to build your audience. I know for a lot of us, we think about how do we do this in order for more folks to know our work. I would say whatever platform you decide to use, engage with others on the platform first. What I mean is, in order to build community, it's a two-way street. You can't just say, for instance, sell something. And I know you all probably get annoyed with this. You probably are on one of these platforms where people message you and it's like, buy my product, buy. But they didn't even take the time to say, hey, how you doing? Or like, I love the work that you're doing. Or even just acknowledge that who you are and what you do. And so I think first is that you want to find and build community with people on the platform. Another piece that I do is that I reply to everyone who leaves a comment on anything I've posted online. This takes work. I can't lie to you. It can get very, it can be a lot depending on how viral the post goes. But here's why. All of these platforms have an algorithm, and the algorithm is dictated on keeping people on the platform. So if the more that you post and leave comments for other people who have posted to you, the more likely they are to reply to you. And keeping people on is the goal of the platform. And the platforms reward people and users who keep people on the platform, because they can the platforms can advertise to individuals. So there's incentives for you to keep people on. And one way to do this is by replying to everyone who leaves a post for you. Another piece is to collaborate with others who have access to your ideal audience. So for instance, if I was someone, let's say, for instance, you want to do work on, supporting school leaders, right? And let's say we wanted to support novice school leaders. What I would do is then I might start maybe an interview series where I interview new school leaders, because the likelihood of them, when I interview them about their experiences and I put it online, they have an audience of other new school leaders. And so I'm going to continue to leverage that, and more people might be in my relevant existence. And then once people know who I am, they might want to be on my interview series, or they might want to work with me because they know that's my research area. So I think you can definitely, as researchers, be very mindful of like generating an audience by collaboration. I think this is really important. And I do it. I have a show called Office Hours where I interview doc students and researchers who have leveraged their scholarship, because I want to talk to other doc students and other researchers who are interested in building up, using social media to get and build out their work and develop, consulting practice. So again, you just have to be mindful who your audience is and collaborate. And then what I will say is that whenever there's an event or a prominent situation that is related to your research, provide commentary. This is one way to do it. When COVID, the onset of COVID, you saw a lot of public health scholars really positioning themselves in this way, talking about the onset, what's going to happen, et cetera. You have so many things that have happened there might be a particular issue, let's say in Texas, and you might maybe send it to a more Texas-oriented venue, right? You might even write an op-ed for a local newspaper that's related to something specifically that's happening in the community where you live, because you're an expert in that particular area. I know one of my coaches had done dissertation, she's a professor, but she ended up writing a piece about a situation that happened with her daughter. Her daughter was called a racial term during school, and she talked about what can school leaders do to train, to help support the students to not have these type of incidences happen, because her research is on equity in leadership. So when Dr. Patricia Varela, when she does this work, she's connecting it directly to her research from an incident that has happened. So again, you all have a lot of opportunity to connect your research to what's going on in society, as well as locally and what's happening in your communities. As I close, I will say that when building an online following, I will say it's helpful for you to quickly get their information so you can take them offline. Because what's happening, if you're trying to build, a lot of folks go online to build a following for a following purpose. That's okay. But I want you all to start thinking about, what is my end result? What's my end game? Am I doing this to secure contracts with districts? Am I doing this to secure contracts with universities? Maybe I do equity audits. And, I'm going to talk about why university equity audits, here are ways to structure them. I talk about all these things online because I want to attract, DEI officers so that they can, I can work in contract with them. As soon as you get those connections, you want to build those offline as well, because what I would hate to happen, I've seen this happen, when social media platforms, you build a great following, let's say you have 100,000 followers on TikTok. Tomorrow, TikTok just says, hey, we're out of business. We're shutting it down. You lost all that 100,000 followers and you have nothing to show for it. You don't even have their information anymore. And so I always will say that you want to gather it and bring them offline as much as you can to build and support whoever your ideal audience is. And again, I'll leave it at that. I'm someone, again, who always believes in using research to inform policy and practice. And I think one of the ways we have to do this is through leveraging social media. And just to give an example to kind of tie it all together, I write about teacher diversity, and I talk about a lot online, and there was a bill that was up in the Maryland State House of Appropriations. So I live in Maryland and a professor in Maryland. And so there was this bill that was coming forth, and the state delegate reached out to myself and a couple other scholars, because we have been doing this work online, talking about it online, and then also writing the research. And I actually ended up giving a testimony on behalf and for this particular bill about diversifying the workforce and grants and programs to do that. So there's so many opportunities to build the connections from your research to policy to practice. And I think, again, that social media can be one of the tools that you use to do that. And with that, I think I'm right at about my 46 minutes or so. So I would love to engage in conversation, and I'd love to hear what questions you all have. And let's start the dialogue. And feel free to use the chat, or Jordan, I'll turn it back over to you. How would you like for the Q&A to be handled? I'm fine, whatever way works best.
Yeah, so I'm free to help facilitate through any questions that are in the chat. You can drop them now, but also if you'd like to speak directly, you can just raise your little hand, and I can unmute you or ask you to unmute one at a time. So I see Mr. Jamia, it wants to comment, or he took his hand down. Did you want to comment, sir?
It was just a clapping emoji.
Oh, clapping. I'm so sorry. It wasn't the reason. Okay, somebody else would like to comment. Dr. FLRG.
So, excuse me. Thank you so very much, Dr. Goings, for this genuine, wonderful presentation about how to use social media in education. It's very meaningful. My question is related to, I was just visiting your website, and I see it's very structured, has a lot of interesting information, videos, services, everything. How do you build your website, and how do you use that in developing your careers and assisting your students?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So first thing is that I do not build my website. I'm an academic. I have no skill set whatsoever with building websites. But what I do is I looked around, and I had a couple colleagues whose websites I really liked. And then I asked him, I said, hey, who built your website? And so I work with someone, his actual niche, interesting enough, now I've referred to so many people, his niche is academics. And so he's done both of my sites, my personal, ramongoings.com, as well as my business one with Done Dissertation. I'd be glad to make a referral and send you the information. Just let me know. I can definitely send, I'll jot that down. I'll send you information. And then they kind of help you think through the design. Because again, I want to work with experts on this. I'm not the expert in this area. And so they know how to make me look good online. And so that's what I did. I worked with a company called, I'm trying to remember, Featherlight, I believe the company name is now. But I will connect you with Tyler, who is he owns the company over there. But how this works and why it's important to have particularly a website. One time I went on a job interview and I was a finalist for this position, and I went on and I had my job talk. Job talk went really well. And right after the job talk, after the Q&A session, we're wrapping up, I'm packing up my materials. I had one of the folks in the audience come up to me. He was a professor at that university. He said, Ramon, I really love what you did. But more in particular, what I love what you did and what I really appreciated was your website. He said, I love how you present yourself there. And what it showed me was that this person was not on the search committee. So he had looked me up before I got there. And so with that, it let me know that your website for all of us it's like a calling card in many ways. It kind of represents who you are before you step in the room. So I think a lot of folks, if you don't have a website, go get one. And if you definitely should have it. And for a lot of you all, what I would suggest is that first things first, go to like a GoDaddy.com where you buy the domain names and buy your name, firstandlastname.com. I would suggest that everybody do that. There may be some taken, so you may have to get a little creative. It might be first name, middle initial, last name.com. Or if that's taken, you might have to go first, last name, phd.com. You can figure out what makes best sense, but definitely own your domain name. And then at least you have that until you can get, someone to design your website. But I'm all for folks using that. And I have an office hour episode coming up probably in the next month or so with a doctoral student. She's getting her PhD in chemistry, but her specialty is a business where she helps academics design their websites as well. And so she does both because she's seen like she wants people to show up right as academics in STEM in particular. So I love that question. I think everybody should have a website to really showcase your work. And it doesn't have to be it doesn't be intricate. It could be a one-page website. It just shows who you are, what you do, maybe attach your CV. I think on my website I have my CV, and I usually update that every so often so folks have access to that. And again, it brings so many opportunities, and people visit it that I don't know are visiting. And it gives you ways to branch out your work. I hope that was helpful for that question.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you so much.
I had a question, Dr. Goings, and my question is, what is your favorite current platform to use? What's the platform that you feel like you get the most engagement on?
LinkedIn was 100% for my audience.
Okay.
Yeah, because for me, what I like about LinkedIn in particular, it has the professionals that I need to talk to. It's not, people go on LinkedIn and everyone has a different persona online, right? So what you see people on LinkedIn look different on TikTok, look different on Instagram. I like LinkedIn because you're only dealing with professionals. So it's not everybody's going to do, LinkedIn has a kind of niche, which I really like. And so they're simple things like their website doesn't crash. I know for a lot of people who market online and like have an online following, Instagram and Facebook went out for, I think it was a day, I think it was last year. And I think people lost their minds. Like, what am I going to do? And that showed me like LinkedIn was working just fine. And so there's not going to be those types of things because it's not going to get overrun in that way. And I just like my audience is there. Doc students are on there looking for job opportunities. Professors are on there because I do a lot of work with professors and deans of colleges, and they bring me in to work with their doctoral program. So all my audience is on LinkedIn. And so right now that's my favorite.
Okay, very cool. And I see Dr. Etchels has a hand up.
Yes, thank you, Jordan. Dr. Goings, I was going to ask you, what are you seeing in terms of the graduate or neophyte early faculty needs that are coming to you in terms of how savvy their resumes look, or how able they are to make websites, what they know about starting a business or marketing? Or because one of the things I've been pondering, and one of the conversations that often is in graduate and early staff faculty circles, is that when you come into the PhD program, you're kind of designed to become tenure track faculty, right? That's the the car that's been built in the factory.
Yep.
But the endpoint career goals for a lot of PhDs is not actually 10-year track, and they don't exit their careers and retire from a university or a school of education like ours.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of the diversification within PhDs that are coming to you?
Yeah, so a lot of folks have aspirations. So when people come to work with us, we have them fill out an application. We ask, well, what do you want to do when this is done? And so we get a lot of folks that want to become faculty because that's just, people know me in that way. But we get a lot of folks who want to build consultancies, but they see what I've done and they want to do that. So there are a lot of students that want to do it. But as you mentioned, the way doctoral student programs are structured, there's no course on like how to market. All those things that you need to know as an entrepreneur, you're not taught. And so even I was not taught. So my own training in and of itself was not this. It just so happened I came from a music background where as a musician, we're very much entrepreneurial. So I had kind of developed that. I had already had that skill set from running my own music studio and running a practice where I gave individual lessons to students. But yeah, I get a lot of students who are looking out, how do I build my consultancy? And a lot of folks are figuring out, how do I use social media? I think a lot of people are apprehensive. I think sometimes the training as professors we give our students is to, oh, don't worry about that till later, like do that later. And just to give an example, I was at a conference for what was the Home Scholars. I remember I was presenting about this topic. It was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I talked about this. I had a professor who stood up in the back of the room and was saying, why are you telling all these doc students to do all this when they should be worried about writing for publication? And I kind of had an exchange with him about it. And I was just like, well, why can't you do both? And I think what happens is that we have to, as professors, then provide opportunities and spaces for us to get those skill sets. And so it becomes a matter of us as the professors, like if we don't have the skill set, then we may have to either develop it or bring people in who can help our students develop it. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of. I think graduate education in particular are trying to figure this out because a lot of students are not looking to go faculty because all of what you're seeing online, folks are not happy in these tenure promotion, tenure position, not getting tenure, the publish and perish type of paradigm, all these things are impacting folks' perspectives. And so, but it takes a different mindset. And a lot of us don't have that mindset to like really say, hey, it's okay to do this. And I would say that was the last thing. I get a lot of folks who say to their students that you shouldn't do this because, not because they shouldn't, but because that professor doesn't know how to help them do it.
Yeah. Are you seeing any universities that are really leading the way and sort of being an icebreaker for that entrepreneurship and innovation and like just the consultancy?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with UC Berkeley. They're doing a lot of that. I've worked with a lot of their students. I'm sure else I've been working with lately in that lens. American University, they have an ed leadership program. A lot of them, I work with a lot of their students. I work with that program in particular. Those are the two that come to mind. A lot of them, you're starting to see this little sprinkling of folks, but a lot of times what they're doing is bringing in outside people because they just don't have that expertise or even track within a doc program that gives a student like an entrepreneurship class, because a lot of us think about, we got to get them writing these dissertations or we got to get them publishing and not that whole piece of life after. But thank you. That's a great question. And definitely it's a shift that I think we have to make as faculty.
Yeah.
And I think
Thank you for your insight.
yeah. And I think our last question might be Dr. or Mrs. I'm not sure, Pittman. She has her hand up. Welcome. I'd love to hear your question.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Hi, Ramon. I've heard so much from you from Lawrence Scott. We used to work together. But you may have talked about this.
Great.
I was running late from a meeting. Oh, I'm frozen. Am I frozen?
No,
you're good.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Did you talk about joining like ResearchGate, academia? What do you think about all of those things that are coming out now?
I have them just because, again, I just have them as a place. I don't really use them to probably their full extent. People reach out to me all online on ResearchGate. So if you're one of those students that reached out, I'm sorry, I don't check it often. So I go like maybe once a quarter and check the messages, and people have requested articles. And so I do use it for that. It is a platform, but it's a way to get your research out, but then there's no follow. You can't engage with someone. So I want to be on a platform where I can engage with my audience. So I know that student or that professor who reached out, I can chat with them or, and have a conversation about what they need and, and build with them from there. That's how I met Lawrence. It's kind of similar, similar way.
I know. We'll talk about that later, but yes. So thank you.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any either comments or final questions for Dr. Goins? I personally loved this presentation. I think it was extremely helpful as a first-year PhD student in establishing a brand and using the tools that are out there. Because for me, I thought about journals and getting your work out the same way, like, oh, just get in a journal and people will find it. So this was very insightful. So does anyone else have anything they'd like to add or ask? Okay, I don't see anything. All right, I would love to thank you, Dr. Goins, for coming and chatting with us. I can't gush enough about how much I loved this as a like I said, a PhD student new into academia. And we're just so grateful that you donated your time to come and speak with us today. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I hope to definitely connect with you all. So definitely reach out online wherever you can find me. I'd love to continue the conversation.
Yes, you'll definitely be getting a follow from me.
Sounds good.